The Capela dos Ossos, the Chapel of Bones in Evora, Portugal, contains the skeletons of over 5,000 people. All human cultures have had celebrations and festivals around death and dying. Samhain is probably our most recent ancestor for our annual time of year we're in right now of Halloween in our American and European culture. A Celtic festival halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice that marks the beginning of the darker half of the year in the northern hemisphere. A final harvest festival, a time to honor ancestors, a time when the veil between life and death and this world and another is its thinnest. All Hallows Eve, the vigil of All Saints' Day, is on October 31st. We now do Halloween. And All Saints' Day on November 1st celebrates all the saints, those known by name, the St. Anthony's and St. Teresa's, but also all the saints nobody's really heard of, that were great and wonderful people that we don't know about. And then there's All Souls Day, where we celebrate all those who have lived and died. We have a lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations named All Souls, for everyone who is holy, which we believe is everyone. The Day of the Dead used cultural elements from these holidays and indigenous customs and histories. And all these traditions have both dark and light elements, can be approached in serious or silly and playful ways. Whether it's the skeletons in the Chapel of Bones, the Capela dos Ossos in Evora, Portugal, or whether it's the Dem Bones dancer in the front of the congregation. We can come at this from different angles. And what we reflect on today is Memento Mori, remember that you have to die. A reminder that no one gets out alive, and that we're all pilgrims ultimately on the same journey. And this can seem like a very morbid kind of topic, but I think it doesn't have to be. Only in modern history have we made having to think about death something to always be afraid of. We live in a death-denying culture, even though we live in a death-dealing culture. It's a strange paradox, We live in a death-dealing culture, especially in our country. And yet at the same time, it seems like we don't want to deal with the realities of death and dying, and the loss and the grief and the pain that can go with it. But also, we don't want to deal with the fact that it's part of our natural process either. Until very recently, people were buried in our culture. Cremation has now taken over the majority in the United States, but only for the last 10 years. Up till then, the vast majority of people who passed on in our culture were filled full of toxic chemicals, dressed up in their finest clothes, and had makeup put on, so they wouldn't look dead. When you stop and think about it, it's really bizarre. We're like one of the only cultures in the world where a dead body just couldn't be a dead body. It had to be all dressed up and made up. It's like we weren't really good with dealing with that. But it was a modern thing, though. Up until the last 100 years or so, remembering we are going to die eventually was not considered a morbid or horrible thing, but a reminder to lead a good life, to find meaning where you can, and to celebrate the good that happened in life whenever it did and whenever you could. In the Renaissance, the danse macabre was wildly popular. People would dress up as skeletons in Dem Bones, right? And impersonate death and dance with people of all ages and all classes. Rich or poor, of whatever nation, death carries all away. The Capela dos Ossos, the Chapel of Bones in Evora, Portugal, contains the skeletons of over 5,000 people. At one time, it was thought that they were all victims of the plague and Black Death in Europe. But science eventually told us they were just the remains of countless everyday citizens of Evora who died of all kinds of different reasons, just like humans do. The chapel was built between 1460 and 1510 by Franciscan monks to bring their brothers in the community to a contemplation of the ephemeral, the transitory nature of this life. And for a very practical reason, that Evora is an ancient city, was an inhabited site of some size well before the Romans took over and built on it. And there were over 40 large cemeteries that by the Middle Ages then were full. And so the monks exhumed the bodies and built a chapel. And I was afraid to go there at first, but when I got there, it really wasn't weird. It was very strange. I thought I was going to be all weirded out and like, I don't know if I'll go in. But I did, and it was fine. Because it seemed that it very much was in the spirit of, this is a reality. And although the religion that built it was probably a little more into the darker side of trying to remind people of the dangers of what could happen to you if you die without your soul being saved or something, it no longer holds that air. I don't know if it did, but it doesn't. It's very, very different. And it reminded me of the prayer in the Buddhist tradition called the Five Remembrances. And the Five Remembrances are reminders that eventually we're going to die. The Five Remembrances say, I am of the nature to grow old. I can't escape aging. I am of the nature to have ill health. I can't escape illness as a human being. I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. I can't escape being separated from them at some point somehow. And my actions, in the end, are my only true possessions. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. There are some Buddhist communities and some Buddhist monasteries where this is said every morning. And when I went on a Buddhist retreat years ago, and this was said the mornings of the retreat, the first morning it struck me as really creepy. But the second and third morning it seemed fine. It was just a statement of what is, and get on with today. And I wonder if that's how the monks and community took it through history. Because we don't talk so much about death and dying, and we've become a death-denying culture, I think we've added in our modern time fears about death onto whatever might have existed before. And I confronted this myself when many years ago I became a hospice chaplain. And if you don't know what hospice is, it's a special medical and social ministry to people who are dying to help people die well and comfortably and live as best they can until they die. And I was wondering if it was going to be really depressing and scary. And to my surprise, and to the surprise of people who would ask me about it as I did it or after I did it, I found it to be the exact opposite. Thich Nhat Hanh says, we should not suppress knowledge of our frailty and impermanence. These are the fears that lie in the depths of our consciousness. And to be free of these fears, we must invite remembrances, he means the Five Remembrances, into our consciousness and stop seeing them as enemies. And when I worked in hospice, I stopped seeing all those things as enemies. And I saw lots of other people who had stopped seeing them as enemies. I would go into households and I would talk as the chaplain with patients and with their families. And almost without exception, it was the families, not the person dying, that were really in need of my services. That by and large, almost every patient I spoke with in hospice, in their own way, had come to their own realization, their own terms, and their own peace with their own dying. And I found that a really important lesson. Like Mary Oliver says in her poem, I don't want to go kicking and screaming and cursing at things. I want to be at peace with stuff. And I was taught that lesson by the people I served in hospice. It was really powerful. And the opposite of depressing, it was really enlivening, because what I saw a lot as people journeyed with loved ones to the end of their life was lots of love. I saw long-standing disagreements and long-standing estrangements end, people be forgiven. I saw a lot of families bring out the best in humanity to each other to take care of and support each other. And I learned that your family pet knows a lot more than you do. Countless times, patients, when the dog or the cat started sitting on or near or under the bed constantly, I knew the end was near. You learned a lot of stuff in hospice about death and dying. It was interesting. And it wasn't sad, and it wasn't depressing. It became a part of the way of things. I mean, when you deal with death and dying every day as a workaday world, you either, I think, come to terms with that, or it's something you can't do. And I think the nurses, especially I worked with in hospice, may in the end be the greatest ministers I've ever encountered in my journey. They were all social workers and chaplains and doctors as well as nurses. They were all great. And facing our own death and dying offers us the opportunity to practice an incredible ultimate compassion for ourselves and, in a sense, for other people too. Because ultimately we're not going to be here. 100 years from now, as they say, all new people. None of us here will be here in 100 years, more than likely. Doing a little bit of Memento Mori might help us surface that compassion for ourselves and for those we may find difficult. One of my favorite pieces of literature is A Christmas Carol. And one of my favorite parts is when Scrooge's nephew is telling him things at the beginning of the story. He says, I have always thought of Christmas time when it comes around as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when people seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of others as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. Maybe just a little bit of sensible dealing with death and dying, a little more up front, might put us in that place a little more often. Thinking of this service, I remembered another Zen story called The Tigers and the Strawberry. A man's being chased by a tiger. He runs until he reaches the edge of a cliff, and with the tiger just steps behind him, he climbs down a vine hanging over the edge, and he dangles and he looks down, and below him is another tiger. And then two mice begin gnawing at the vine he's holding on to. And then he notices a strawberry growing out of the side of the cliff, and he plucks it and eats it. The strawberry is the purpose of the Memento Mori. This life is not perfect, it can be difficult. And it ends for all of us. But in between the start and the end, there are strawberries. And there are sunrises and sunsets. And there are rainbows and butterflies and spiral gardens and cupcakes made by Jane. And Maria's saxophone. And Sunday mornings here and Pride Fest. And holiday dinners and coffee with your best friend. Maybe a little bit more of remembering that we're not going to be here, it's the way of things, might focus us a little bit more on the good we have to celebrate and how special it is. All those things, if we step back for perspective, are quite literally the strawberry between two tigers. We have them. And that's the power of joy. Joy is a prerequisite, I think, for compassion. Only people who let themselves experience joy when it comes then want it for not only themselves but others, and have compassion for others when things are difficult for them and joy seems separated. Show me someone who is so hard of heart and mean towards others, and I'm going to put my money that whoever that person is, for whatever reason, and probably traumatic, joy is probably a stranger. Over the last couple of weeks, we've had an example of this in real time. An example of the joy of compassion of the Spirit of life, opposing the mean and cruel, unfeeling, afraid spirit of the fear of death. This example has come to be called the resistance frog. Against a regime that wants to instill fear, including the fear of death, with its secret militarized police and zip-tying children and disappearing people to hidden jails, arises a superhero for our times. The resistance frog, a court jester, a clown in the circus of life that appears in between those anxious moments of the lion taming act and the high wire performance to make us laugh. Resistance frog makes the toxic masculinity of militarized police wrestling elderly and children to the ground look exaggerated and comical. Really? This is being tough to you? Because people who can do that, I got to think, joy is a stranger to them. And maybe that's part of the reason they seem so compassionateless. And I think they are vastly more afraid of us than we are of them. The resistance frog is a skeleton dancing with the king in the dance macabre. Glinda telling the Wicked Witch of the West she has no power in Munchkin Land. Gandalf telling the Balrog it can't pass. I hope, and I hope you've seen this social media post this week because it's one of my favorite of all time. Person going by Reverend Magdalene said in a viral post this week that in the future, I hope no King's Day is celebrated as a federal holiday. And little children leave out dance mixtapes and cookies for the resistance frog who leaves pocket constitutions in their shoes. That's awesome. And maybe that's kind of why we bring in the dancing skeletons and the ghosts with smiley faces and the different things that are more silly and fun into our times of dealing with the veil being thin and passing from one life to another. Because it reminds us to make our fun and to have our joy when we can. This prayer was written by Father Antonio de Ascensao, translated by Reverend Carlos Martins, A framed copy hangs on one of the pillars inside the Capela dos Ossos. Where are you going in such a hurry, my traveler? Pause. Do not advance your travel. You have no greater concern than this one, that on which you focus your sight here. Recall how many have passed from this world. Reflect on your similar end. There is good reason to reflect, if only all did the same. Ponder, you so influenced by fate. Among all the many concerns of the world, so little do you reflect on dying. If by chance you come to this place, stop and pause for the sake of your journey. For the more you pause, the further on your journey you will be. These bones here, them bones there, for ours are waiting. So remember that your actions are your only true possessions. Make of your life something particular and real. Keep your heart open and compassionate towards others. And eat the strawberry. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.